They called themselves the Desert Raiders, the most notorious bandit gang in Arizona's Copper Valley. For months, they'd been ravaging the town of Sagebrush Springs, treating it like their personal hunting ground, until they crossed paths with Thomas "Hawk" Harrison. To them, he was just another 75-year-old rancher living on the outskirts of town, an easy mark. But when they burned the American flag that flew over his family ranch, they made the biggest mistake of their lives. What their ruthless leader Marcus, Snake, Cole didn't know was that this quiet old man was a legendary Green Beret commander about to make one phone call that would summon a brotherhood of over 150 elite veterans who owed him their lives. In 24 hours, Sagebrush Springs would become the battleground for an extraordinary story of redemption, where a gang's worst act of disrespect would lead to their most profound transformation. The morning sun painted the desert landscape in hues of amber and gold as Thomas Harrison's weathered hands moved with practiced precision. For 50 years, he'd performed this same ritual, raising the American flag over Harrison Ranch exactly at sunrise. His movements were slower now, but they carried the same deliberate care they'd shown during his years commanding special forces, units in the world's most dangerous places. Sarah Chen watched from her family's general store across the dusty road, absently reorganizing cans that were already perfectly aligned. She'd been running the store in Sagebrush Springs for 15 years, and like everyone else in town, she'd grown accustomed to the quiet dignity of Hawk's morning routine. "Coffee's getting cold, Hawk," she called out as he finished securing the flag's lines. Thomas turned, a slight smile crossing his sun-weathered face. "Can't rush respect, Sarah. Some things need to be done proper." Inside the store, Michael Rodriguez sat at his usual spot by the window, his own coffee cooling as he watched a group of riders approach on dirt bikes and ATVs. The riders slowed their engines, which growled like desert predators as they passed. Thomas. Their tactical vests bore the emblem of the Desert Raiders, a coiled rattlesnake wrapped around a dagger. "Third time this week they've done that," Michael observed as Thomas entered the store. "They're getting bolder." Thomas settled onto his usual stool at the counter, his movements carrying the same precision he'd shown with the flag. "Folks who need to show their strength usually don't have much of it." Sarah placed a fresh cup of coffee before him, her hands trembling slightly. "They were in here yesterday afternoon, Hawk. 8 of them. Scared my customers half to death, throwing their weight around like they owned the place." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that her words had struck a nerve. "They give you any real trouble?" "Not exactly." Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the window. "But their leader, the one they call Snake, he made it clear they'd be expecting a special treatment from now on, free supplies, whatever they want, said it was for protection." The bell above the store's door chimed as Sheriff Diego Martinez entered, his tan uniform crisp despite the early hour. The sheriff's face carried the weight of too many similar conversations. "Morning, Hawk, Sarah, Michael." He nodded to each, in turn settling onto a stool next to Thomas. "Suppose you've heard about the Watson place." Thomas wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "James mentioned something yesterday. Vandalism is putting it mildly." Diego sighed, accepting a coffee from Sarah. "Broke every window in his barn, left one of their rattlesnake markers behind, their calling card. James is thinking of selling, moving to his daughter's place in Phoenix. 4th business this month," Michael added from his spot by the window. "First it was the pharmacy, then Garcia's auto shop, now this." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "They're smart. Never enough evidence to make charges stick, and folks are too scared to testify anyway." Thomas studied his reflection in the coffee's dark surface. "Fear is a funny thing, Diego. Makes people forget who they are, what they're capable of." "Speaking from experience?" Diego asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Thomas's eyes took on a distant look, seeing something far beyond the store's walls. Back in '83, had a young lieutenant in my unit, green as summer corn, scared of his own shadow. Taliban had us pinned down outside Kandahar, worst firefight I'd seen. That lieutenant, he found something inside himself that day, something stronger than fear. What happened to him? Sarah asked softly. A slight smile crossed Thomas's face. Last I heard, he was running special operations training at Fort Bragg. Fear didn't define him. His response to it did. The rumble of engines grew louder again. Through the window, they watched as 3 raiders on ATVs parked directly in front of the store. One of them, a tall man they called Viper, deliberately knocked over Thomas's display of farm supplies. "Better clean that up, old-timer," Viper called out, his voice carrying through the store windows. "Wouldn't want anyone to trip and hurt themselves." Thomas continued sipping his coffee, seemingly unperturbed by the display of intimidation, but Michael noticed how his knuckles had whitened around the cup. "They're pushing," Diego said quietly. "Testing boundaries, seeing who'll break first." "That. How you see it, Sheriff?" Thomas's voice remained steady. Diego met his gaze. "How do you see it, Hawk?" "I see men who mistake cruelty for strength, who think fear equals respect." Thomas stood slowly, leaving money for his coffee. "Hawk, what are you going to do?" Sarah called after him as he walked toward the door. He paused, his hand on the handle. "Same thing I do every morning, Sarah. Tend my ranch, raise my flag, remember who I am." He looked back at them, and for just a moment, they saw something in his eyes. Not anger, but the kind of quiet resolve that moved mountains. Question is, when the time comes, will this town remember who it is? The door closed behind him with a gentle chime. They watched through the window as Thomas crossed the road, walking past the sneering raiders without acknowledgement. He began picking up his scattered supplies, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "Sometimes I forget," Michael said softly, "what he used to be, before he was just Thomas the rancher." Sheriff Martinez's face was grim. "Way things are going, we might all be reminded soon enough." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Sagebrush Springs, its light catching the stars and stripes that still flew proudly over Harrison Ranch. The flag moved gently in the desert breeze, its shadow falling across the dusty road like a line drawn in the sand. A boundary that once crossed would change everything. Marcus Snake Cole sat astride his customized ATV, watching Harrison Ranch through mirrored tactical sunglasses. The morning sun glinted off his vehicle's roll bars and the silver snake ring on his right hand. Behind him, 6 members of the Desert Raiders waited, their engines idling with predatory patience. The old man was still inside, visible through the ranch house window as he organized his tool shed. "Man's got some nerve," Viper growled, adjusting the pistol holstered at his hip. "Everyone else in town's falling in line, but he acts like we don't even exist." Snake's tactical vest creaked as he shifted, the embroidered rattlesnake on his back catching the light. "Man's either stupid or brave, don't much care which." A local rancher's truck left Harrison's property, hurrying past the raiders with downcast eyes. Thomas emerged after them, a rake in his weathered hands, and began clearing tumbleweeds from his front yard. His movements were methodical, unhurried, as if the 6 dangerous men watching him were nothing more than morning shadows. Time we had. "A chat with our friendly neighborhood rancher," Snake announced, killing his engine. His boots hit the dusty ground with deliberate force as he dismounted. Inside the general store across the road, Sarah Chen's hand trembled as she reached for the phone. Michael Rodriguez stopped her with a gentle touch. "Don't," Michael whispered. "Hawk knows what he's doing." Snake approached Thomas with the casual menace of a circling predator, his men spreading out behind him. "Nice morning for yard work, old-timer." Thomas continued his work, his eyes on the ground. "Every morning's a nice morning if you've got the right attitude." "Attitude?" Snake chuckled, but there was no humor in it. That's actually what I wanted. To discuss. See, some folks in town, they've got the right attitude. They understand how things work now. But you, he kicked a pile of tumbleweeds back onto the cleared ground, you seem confused about the natural order of things. Thomas paused, looking at the scattered brush. His voice remained steady, almost conversational. Natural order is a funny thing. Nature's got a way of surprising folks who think they understand it. Viper stepped forward, his face darkening. You threatening us, old man? No, son, Thomas replied, resuming his work. Just sharing some wisdom, free of charge. Snake moved closer, using his height to loom over Thomas. Wisdom's got no place in Sagebrush Springs anymore. Town runs on respect now, and respect. He reached out, knocking the rake from Thomas's hands. Respect has a price. The rake clattered against the hard desert ground. Thomas looked at it for a long moment, then raised his eyes to meet Snake's mirrored gaze. Something in that look made Snake take an unconscious step backward. Son, Thomas said quietly, you wouldn't know the first thing about respect. Across the road, James Watson watched from the general store's porch, his hands clenching into fists. Next to him, Maria Ortiz, the town council member, placed a restraining hand on his arm. Don't, she whispered. You'll only make it worse. Snake recovered quickly, anger replacing his momentary uncertainty. Maybe we need to educate you about respect. Show you what happens to folks who don't understand the new way of things. Thomas bent down slowly, picked up his rake. I learned about respect in places you can't imagine, from men you'll never measure up to. His eyes swept over the gang members. Boys playing at being men, thinking fear equals strength. Seen your kind before, in the jungle, in the desert, in the mountains. All end up the same way. Is that right? Snake's voice dropped dangerously. And how's that? Forgotten, Thomas replied simply, because bullies don't leave legacies. They just leave scars, and scars fade. Viper moved forward, hand reaching for his holster, but Snake held up a staying hand. His smile was cold as a desert night. Strong words for a man your age, living on borrowed time? Snake's eyes moved to the flag flying overhead. Be a shame. If something happened to your precious ranch, or that flag you're so fond of, accidents happen after all. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. The other gang members felt it even if they couldn't name it. The subtle transformation of an old rancher into something else entirely. That flag's seen worse than you, Thomas said softly. Came back with me from Kandahar. 33 men died protecting what it stands for. Real men, warriors. His eyes locked onto Snake's. You touch that flag, son, and you'll learn the difference between playing war and living it. For a moment, the only sound was the desert wind snapping the flag's fabric overhead. Then Snake laughed, but the sound was forced. Big talk from a relic. He backed away, mounting his ATV. We'll see how tough you are when the time comes. Because it is coming, old man. Count on it. The desert raiders roared away, leaving dust and tension hanging in the air. Thomas resumed clearing his yard, his movements as steady as ever, but those who knew him well could see the change in his eyes. The awakening of something long dormant, but never truly forgotten. Inside the store, Michael Rodriguez finally released the breath he'd been holding. Lord Hawk, what are you doing? Sarah's hands shook as she poured coffee. They'll be back, you know they will. Of course they will, Thomas said, entering the store. Men like that always come back. Their pride won't let them do anything else. Sheriff, Martinez entered, having witnessed the confrontation from down the street. Got a call from Oak Canyon this morning. Desert raiders torched a ranch there last night. Owner wouldn't pay protection money. Just a matter of time before they do the same here. Town council's meeting tonight, Maria added, joining them. They want to discuss accommodation. Thomas's eyes hardened. Accommodation, pretty word for surrender. "What choice do we have?" James asked, his voice bitter. "They've got the whole town terrorized. Police can't stop them. No one can." Thomas sipped his coffee, his mind clearly elsewhere. A memory surfaced. Kandahar, 1983, his unit pinned down, overwhelming odds, the radio call that changed everything. "Sometimes," he said finally, "it's not about stopping them. It's about showing them they're not the only ones who can play rough." He stood, leaving money for his coffee. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make a phone call." "What kind of phone?" "Call," Sheriff Martinez asked, though something in his expression suggested he already knew. Thomas paused at the door. "Just checking in with some old friends, men who haven't forgotten what it means to stand together." His eyes moved to the flag visible through the window. Men who still remember what that flag really stands for. As Thomas walked back to his ranch, the morning sun caught his silver hair, casting a soldier's shadow on the dusty ground. The flag snapped in the wind overhead, its stars and stripes a reminder of promises made and kept, of brotherhood forged in fire, and of debts that were about to come due. Across town, Marcus "Snake" Cole gathered his men, his pride still stinging. From the old man's defiance, the Desert Raiders' makeshift compound, an abandoned mining facility they'd claimed as their own, buzzed with restless energy. "Tonight," he told them, his voice hard with decision, "we show Sagebrush Springs what happens to people who don't respect the natural order, starting with that damn flag." What Snake couldn't know was that his decision had already set larger forces in motion, forces that had been waiting for just such a moment, just such a reason to remind the world that some bonds never break and some warriors never truly lay down their arms. Darkness settled over Sagebrush Springs like a heavy blanket, broken only by scattered streetlights and the neon glow from Chen's general store. Thomas Harrison stood in his ranch house's study, an old photograph in his weathered hands. The image showed younger men in desert camouflage, their faces streaked with sand, but wearing tired smiles. In the center, a tall soldier held a familiar flag, the same one that now flew outside over his ranch. The phone sat heavy on his desk, a number he hadn't dialed in years written on a faded slip of paper beside it. Through his window, he could see the Desert Raiders gathering at the far end of the main road, their vehicles' headlights gleaming in the darkness like predator eyes. "Just like old times, Colonel," Thomas murmured to the photograph, waiting for the enemy to make their move. The rumble of engines grew louder. Thomas carefully returned the photograph to his desk drawer and moved to the front window. Snake Cole led his gang in a slow parade down the main road. More vehicles than usual, some faces he didn't recognize. Reinforcements called in from other hideouts. Across the street, Sarah was closing up early, her hands shaking as she turned the store's sign to closed. Michael Rodriguez helped her, both casting nervous glances at the gathering raiders. "Get home safe," Thomas called out to them, "and stay inside tonight." Sarah paused, understanding in her eyes. "They're coming for it, aren't they? The flag?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Been coming since the beginning." "Maybe just this once, Hawk." Sarah's voice caught. "No, Sarah," Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "Some things you can't give up, not ever." They hurried to their cars as more raiders filled the street. Thomas counted at least 25 riders now, their engines creating a thunderous chorus, and that echoed off the desert rocks. He could see Sheriff Martinez's patrol car parked discreetly 2 blocks away, watching but unable to intervene without cause. Snake dismounted his ATV, gathering his lieutenants. Viper passed out dark bottles, the rags stuffed in their necks already soaked in gasoline. The gang leader's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Time to teach Sagebrush Springs about respect, about consequences." Thomas moved unhurriedly to his study, picked up the phone. His fingers dialed the number from memory now, the paper unnecessary. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Colonel Jack Richards," Thomas said quietly. "It's Harrison." Remember that night outside Kandahar when you said I'd never have to stand alone again? A pause then. Jesus, Hawk. Been a long time. How? They're about to burn her, Jack. The flag we carried out. The one that covered Martinez and Rodriguez and all the others. Another pause, shorter this time. When Colonel Richards spoke again, his voice had changed, carrying the familiar tone of command. Where are you? Sagebrush Springs, Arizona. Harrison. Ranch on Main Street. How many? Thomas glanced out the window. 25, maybe more. Desert Raiders. Mean bunch. Hold position. Richards's voice was steel. How long can you maintain? Through the window, Thomas watched Snake Cole approach his ranch, Molotov cocktail in hand. Got no choice, Jack. It's not just about the flag anymore. It's about everything it stands for. 8 hours, Richards said firmly. We're already rolling. 8 hours, Thomas confirmed, just like Kandahar. Copy that, Major. Thomas set the phone down as the first bottle crashed through his ranch house window. Flames erupted instantly, spreading across the wooden floor. Come on out, old man! Snake's voice rose above the crackle of fire. Come watch your precious. Flag burn! Thomas moved calmly through his burning house, pausing only to retrieve the photograph from his desk. Outside, the Desert Raiders had formed a half circle around the building, their faces lit by the growing flames. Above them, the flag still flew, its edges illuminated by the fire below. Last chance, old-timer! Snake called out. Kneel, or we burn it all down! Thomas emerged from the smoke like a ghost, his posture straight, his eyes hard as battlefield steel. The sight of him, calm in the face of destruction, made several gang members shift uneasily. Son! Thomas's voice carried clearly despite the roar of flames. You just started a war you can't win. Snake laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. Look around, old man. You're alone. No one's coming to help you. Thomas smiled then. A smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with certainty. That's where you're wrong, boy. See, there's something you need to understand about old soldiers. As if on cue, a distant rumble began to build. Not the chaotic roar of gang vehicles, but the disciplined thunder of machines moving in formation. Snake's head snapped toward the sound, his face showing the first traces of doubt. We never fight alone, Thomas continued, his words carrying the weight of absolute truth. And we never, ever forget our debts. The rumble grew louder, and now emergency vehicles were arriving. But they weren't just local responders. Military stickers marked many of the trucks, and the men emerging from them moved with the unmistakable precision of combat veterans. Well, what the hell is this? Viper demanded, backing toward his ATV. This, Thomas's smile hadn't wavered. This is just the advance party. The real army is still 8 hours out. His eyes locked onto Snake's. Remember what I said about respect? Son, about the difference between playing war and living it? More veterans were arriving by the minute, their presence automatically shifting the balance of power. These weren't weekend warriors or wannabe tough guys. These were men who had seen real combat, who understood real brotherhood. You're bluffing. Snake's facade of control cracked slightly. No way you could... One phone call, Thomas cut him off. That's all it took. One call to remind my brothers that the flag you just tried to burn, it's not just my flag. It belongs to all of us. And we've got 150 more just like these men coming to help us protect it. The fire department was working on the house now, but the damage was done. Yet Thomas stood unmoved, like a sentinel from another time, his eyes never leaving Snake's face. You've got 8 hours, he said quietly. 8 hours to decide what kind of men you really are. Because when Colonel Richards arrives with the main force, there won't be any more decisions to make. Snake backed away, his previous bravado evaporating in the face of something he didn't understand. The unshakable calm of a man who had faced far worse than midnight arson and petty intimidation. Mount up, he barked to his men, trying to maintain control. This isn't over, old man. No, Thomas agreed, watching them scramble to their vehicles. It's just beginning. As the desert raiders roared away into the night, Sheriff Martinez approached. Thomas taking in the scene, the partially burned ranch house, the gathering veterans, and the flag that somehow still flew above it all. Those men, the sheriff nodded toward the veterans now securing the area with military precision. They came awful fast. Been waiting a long time for my call, Diego. Some debts can never be repaid. Some bonds never break. In the distance, more engines could be heard. More veterans arriving, drawn by a network of brotherhood that had laid dormant but never died. Above the smoke and chaos, the flag moved gently in the night breeze, its stars and stripes unmarred by the flames that had tried to claim it. Thomas looked at the photograph in his hand, at the faces of men who had fought and died beneath that flag. 8 hours, he murmured, just like Kandahar. Hold the line and wait for reinforcements. The night was far from over, and Sagebrush Springs was about to learn what real strength looked like, not the false power of intimidation, but the unshakable force of men united by honor, duty, and debts that transcended time itself. The Desert Raiders' compound pulsed with nervous energy as Snake Cole paced the worn floorboards of their command center. Through grimy windows, he watched his men fortifying the perimeter, their movements lacking their usual swagger. The flag burning had been meant to break the old man's spirit. Instead, it had awakened something none of them understood. 35. Trucks just rolled into town, Viper reported, bursting through the door. All veterans, moving in formation like some kind of military unit. Snake hurled his bottle against the wall. How did one phone call bring this many this fast? In the corner, Rattler, the gang's tech expert, looked up from his laptop. You don't get it, boss. That old man, I've been doing some digging. Thomas Hawk Harrison isn't just some veteran. He was something else entirely in Afghanistan. Enlighten. Me, Snake snarled, his composure cracking. 2 silver stars, 3 purple hearts, led one of the most successful special operations units in the war. They called him the Ghost of Kandahar, specialized in extracting trapped units from behind enemy lines. Cobra, who'd been quiet until now, cleared his throat. My cousin was in Afghanistan, used to talk about a Green Beret who pulled out an entire platoon under heavy fire. Said the man moved through hell itself to save them. That's not the worst part, Rattler continued. The colonel he called Richards, Iron Jack. Richards runs the largest veteran motorcycle club in 4 states. These aren't just old soldiers, boss. These are organized, connected, and they've got chapters everywhere. Snake's face darkened as the implications sank in. They'd built their reputation on fear, on the assumption that their targets would always be weaker, more afraid. But now, across town, Thomas Harrison stood in front of his partially burned ranch house, directing arriving veterans with the same quiet authority he'd used in combat. The ranch had become an impromptu command center, with military precision, replacing rural order. Sarah Chen approached, carrying coffee and sandwiches from her store. Hawk, you need to eat something. Been standing there for hours. Thanks, Sarah. He took the coffee but waved off the food. Seen too many men miss important details because they were focused on their stomachs. A group of 5 trucks rolled up, their drivers wearing veteran brotherhood patches. The lead driver, a weathered man in his 60s, dismounted and approached Thomas with military bearing. Master Sergeant James Cooper, sir. Colonel Richards sent us ahead. We're your advance recon. Thomas nodded, recognizing the tactical move. Glad to have you, Sergeant. Town's about 4 miles square. Desert Raiders hold the north end, compound, behind the old copper mine. Cooper pulled out a map, and other veterans gathered around as Thomas detailed the situation. Their formations and responses were automatic, decades of training kicking in like they'd never left the service. Sheriff Martinez watched from his cruiser, amazement crossing his face as Sagebrush Springs transformed into something resembling a military operation. More veterans arrived every hour, each group integrating seamlessly into the growing force. Inside Chen's general store, now serving coffee to a mix of townspeople and newly arrived veterans, the atmosphere had shifted from fear to cautious hope as stories were shared. "I was there," an older veteran told the gathered crowd. "Kandahar, 83. Trapped behind enemy lines with no way out. Everyone said we were done for. Then this helicopter appears out of nowhere, flying through the heaviest fire I'd ever seen. Hawk Harrison pulled 12 of us out that day. Never asked for anything in return, just said this is what brothers do." Similar stories spread through the store as more veterans arrived, each carrying their own memory of the quiet rancher who'd saved lives, led impossible missions, and never sought recognition. James Watson burst into the store, his face flushed with excitement. "You've got to see this. The highway is full of them. Must be 40 more trucks heading this way." Outside, Thomas stood with Cooper studying the town map. "They'll try something before the main force arrives. Snake's pride won't let him wait." "Let them try," Cooper replied grimly. "We've got 30 years of combat experience surrounding that compound. These boys want to play soldier. Let's show them what real soldiers look like." A young veteran approached at a run. "Sir, movement at the compound. Looks like they're splitting up, small groups heading out different directions." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "They're probing our defenses, testing our response time." He turned to Cooper. "Remember Hill 249? Cooper grinned. "Like riding a bike, sir, never forget." He began issuing orders, veterans moving with practiced efficiency to counter the gang's movements. At the compound, Snake watched his scouts depart, trying to regain control of a situation spiraling beyond his understanding. "Find their weak points," he ordered. "These old men can't cover everything." Viper shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, maybe we should consider pulling back, calling in help from other chapters." "We are the help," Snake exploded. "We're the ones people fear. I won't let some geriatric war relics take that away." But his words lacked their usual conviction. Through the window, he could see more veteran trucks arriving, their formation perfect, their purpose clear. In his study, Thomas looked at the old photograph again. The faces of his unit stared back, young men who'd learned the true meaning of brotherhood in the crucible of war. The phone rang. Richards checking in. "How's it looking, Hawk?" "Like old times, Jack. They're testing us, looking for weakness. Just like the Taliban at Kandahar." Richard's voice carried a hint of grim amusement. "Remember what you told me that night about the difference between soldiers and warriors?" Thomas smiled slightly. "Soldiers fight because they have to. Warriors fight because they understand why they have to. We're 2 hours out, 200 strong. Can you hold?" Thomas watched through his window as veterans moved with practiced precision through the streets, establishing communications, transforming Sagebrush Springs into a fortress. "Oh, we'll hold. These boys are about to learn the difference between intimidation and real strength." At Chen's store, now an impromptu medical station, Sarah organized supplies while Michael Rodriguez coordinated with veteran medics. "Think they'll really try something?" she asked. Michael's response was interrupted by Cooper's voice on the radio. "Movement north and east. They're moving in pairs, testing response times." Thomas's calm reply crackled back. "Let them probe. Show them what real tactical superiority looks like." The Desert Raiders' first test came at the edge of town. 2 ATVs tried slipping through the veterans' perimeter, only to find themselves boxed in by perfectly positioned vehicles. "Just like you said, Hawk," Cooper reported. "They're thinking like thugs, not soldiers." "Pride makes men predictable," Thomas replied. "How many?" 2 vehicles, 4 men, looking real nervous now that they realize they're trapped. The trapped raiders gathered in a tight circle, their hushed arguments carrying clearly in the night. Air. Veterans watched silently from concealed positions, their discipline evident in their stillness. "Boss, this was a mistake," one of the trapped raiders hissed. These ain't normal folks we're dealing with. They're playing chess while we're playing checkers. Before his companion could respond, bright lights suddenly flooded the street from all directions. The raiders found themselves illuminated from every angle while their observers remained hidden in darkness. "Gentlemen," Cooper called out, "I suggest you consider your next move very carefully." At the compound, Snake paced nervously as he waited for reports. The radio crackled with his trapped men's voices, their fear evident even through the static. "They've got us surrounded, boss. These guys, they're different, moving like a real military unit." "We should pull everyone back," Viper suggested, watching Snake's face darken. "Regroup while we can." "Shut up!" Snake hurled a chair across the room. "I won't let some old men make us look weak." "Too late for that," Rattler muttered, earning a murderous glare from Snake. Across town at Harrison Ranch, Thomas coordinated the veterans' movements with the same quiet efficiency he'd used in Afghanistan. The study had transformed into a tactical operations center with maps and communication equipment covering every surface. "Echo team reports movement from the south," a veteran radio operator announced. "Larger group this time, maybe 10 vehicles." Thomas studied the map, his mind calculating angles and options. "They're getting desperate, trying to overwhelm one section of our perimeter." He keyed his radio. "All units be advised, main thrust coming from the south, but watch your flanks. This is probably a diversion." The night was about to get very interesting, and Thomas Harrison was ready to show the Desert Raiders what happened when they mistook age for weakness, when they confused intimidation with real strength. The flag still flew overhead, its stars and stripes a reminder of everything these veterans had fought for and would fight for again. As if confirming Thomas's words, the sound of ATVs roared from the south. But these weren't the stealthy approaches of before. This was a full-on charge, the Desert Raiders apparently abandoning subtlety for brute force. "Here they come!" Cooper's voice crackled over the radio. 12 vehicles moving fast, no tactical formation, just raw speed." Thomas's voice remained steady. "Just like we planned, let them through the first line." The charging raiders roared past the first veteran positions, their whoops of triumph dying in their throats as they realized they were being channeled, not evading. Steel cables suddenly pulled taut across side streets, forcing them down a predetermined path. "Now," Thomas commanded. Veterans emerged from doorways and alleys, moving with coordinated precision. Sheriff Martinez's patrol cars appeared at intersections, lights flashing. Within moments, the Desert Raiders' charge had been contained in a 3-block area, completely surrounded. "What the hell is this?" one of the trapped raiders demanded. "This," Thomas's voice carried clearly as he stepped into view, "is what real tactical planning looks like." The old veteran stood calmly in the street, surrounded by men who moved with the deadly grace of trained soldiers. The contrast between their disciplined presence and the gang's chaotic charge couldn't have been clearer. "Last chance," Thomas announced. "Surrender your vehicles, walk away. No charges filed, no consequences. Continue this fight, and you'll learn why they called us the Ghost Unit in Afghanistan." One of the younger raiders, barely in his 20s, suddenly gunned his engine and charged directly at Thomas. Before anyone could react, 3 veterans moved in perfect coordination. The ATV's front wheel was swept out, its rider expertly detained. The entire incident over in seconds. "That's one choice," Thomas commented mildly. "Anyone else want to try their luck against men who've spent decades perfecting the art of combat?" Back at the compound, Snake listened to his men's radio calls with growing desperation. "Fall back!" he screamed into the radio. "Everyone fall back!" But it was too late. The veterans had predicted this too, cutting off escape routes with the same military precision that had trapped them. One by one, Desert Raiders found themselves facing a choice: surrender or escalate against opponents who clearly outmatched them. "Boss," Viper's voice shook slightly over the radio. "We've lost contact with the South team. The East team's surrounded. This isn't working." Snake's world was crumbling. He'd built his power on fear and intimidation, but these men, these veterans, seemed immune to both. Worse, they were systematically dismantling his gang's reputation with each perfectly executed maneuver. In Chen's store, townspeople watched through windows as the veterans efficiently contained the gang's attempted show of force. Sarah stood with Michael and others, amazement on their faces. "My God," Sarah whispered, "look at them move, like they've been doing this together for years." "They have," Sheriff Martinez replied, watching with professional appreciation. "Just not here, not recently, but some skills you never forget." Thomas's voice came over the radio again, addressing the surrounded raiders. "Colonel Richards's main force is 1 hour out. When they arrive, this ends one way or another. Choice is yours, how it ends." The trapped desert raiders looked at each other, their usual bravado replaced by uncertainty. They were used to being the predators, not the prey. Now they found themselves caught in a trap laid by men who'd learned their trade in the hardest school imaginable. One raider, older than the others, suddenly switched off his engine. "I'm done," he announced, climbing off his ATV. "My old man was in Afghanistan. He told me stories about men like these. We ain't winning this fight, boys." Others began following his lead, the clatter of kickstands hitting pavement, spreading like falling dominoes. The veterans maintained their positions, professional to the end, as Sagebrush Springs witnessed the beginning of the Desert Raiders' unraveling. At Harrison Ranch, Thomas watched the surrenders through his binoculars. "Cooper, get those men processed and released, but keep their vehicles. Consider it collateral for good behavior." "Copy that," Cooper replied. "What about the compound?" Thomas's eyes turned north, where Snake Cole and his inner circle still held out. "Snake's got 1 hour to decide if his pride is worth what's coming, because Iron Jack Richards isn't coming alone, and he's not coming to negotiate." Titus was far from over, but already the balance of power had shifted decisively. The Desert Raiders had learned the hard way that real strength wasn't about intimidation. It was about discipline, strategy, and the unbreakable bonds forged in combat. Sarah approached Thomas with fresh coffee, her hands steady now. "I've never seen anything like it, Hawk. The way you all work together, like you can read each other's minds." "Not minds, Sarah. Just training. When you trust the man next to you with your life enough times, you learn to move as one." He sipped the coffee, watching more veterans secure the perimeter. These boys thought fear made them strong. Tonight they're learning what real strength looks like. Inside the compound, Snake's remaining lieutenants watched their leader pace, his composure unraveling with each report of another group surrendering. The sound of more veteran vehicles arriving carried through the night, a constant reminder that their time was running out. "Boss," Rattler spoke cautiously, "maybe we should consider..." "Consider what?" Snake whirled on him. "Surrendering to a bunch of old men? Letting them destroy everything we built here?" "We didn't build anything," Viper said quietly, speaking up for the first time. "We just took through fear. Now we're meeting men who learned about real fear in places like Kandahar and Fallujah." The flag that had started it all still flew over Harrison Ranch, illuminated now by floodlights. In less than an hour, Colonel Richards would arrive with the main force, and the Desert Raiders would learn the final difference between playing at being warriors and facing the real thing. The Desert Raiders' compound simmered with tension as midnight approached. Snake Cole stood at his office window, watching his remaining forces drift between buildings like lost shadows. The night's failures had shaken their confidence, stripped away their aura of invincibility. Through breaks in the clouds, he could see veterans still holding their positions around the perimeter, their discipline unwavering. 8 more gone, Viper reported, entering the office. Just walked out during shift change, left their vests on their ATVs. Snake's fist crashed into the wall. Cowards, after everything we built here. Built? Rattler challenged from his corner, speaking with newfound boldness. We didn't build anything, Snake. We just took through fear. Now we're meeting men who learned about real fear in places like Kandahar and Fallujah. Shut up, Snake whirled on him. You getting soft too? But Rattler stood his ground. My grandfather was a Marine, died in Afghanistan. These men out there, they're what he was, what we pretend to be. At Harrison Ranch, Thomas studied updated positions on his maps as Sarah brought fresh situation reports. The night's encounters had proven their tactical superiority, but he knew Snake's desperation made him dangerous. Another group just surrendered at the West Checkpoint, Sarah announced. Young ones mostly, saying they never signed up for this kind of fight. Thomas nodded, unsurprised. Fear holds men together only until they find something stronger to believe in. Cooper entered, his face showing contained excitement. Just got word from the advance riders. Colonel Richards's force is something to see, Hawk. Over 100 and 50 vehicles moving in perfect formation. State police are actually escorting them. Iron Jack always did know how to make an entrance. Thomas allowed himself a small smile. How long? 30 minutes tops. Already getting reports from towns they've passed through. People lining the streets, watching them pass like an army. On the move. In Chen's store, now serving as an impromptu community center, townspeople gathered to share information and draw strength from the veterans' presence. James Watson stood before the crowd, his earlier fear replaced by determination. All these years, he addressed the gathered citizens, we thought we were weak because we couldn't stand up to them. But look around. Look what happened when one man refused to back down, when one phone call brought an army of heroes to our door. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she worked, remembering all the time she'd served the Desert Raiders with trembling hands. Never seen anything like it, she told her customers. The way these veterans move, the way they work together, like they never stopped being soldiers. Outside, more Desert Raiders approached the veterans' lines, hands raised in surrender. The night's failed attacks had shown them the futility of resistance. Each coordinated veteran response had demonstrated the difference between practiced intimidation and real combat experience. Viper watched from the compound as 3 more of their members walked away, his hand unconsciously touching the dog tags. Hidden under his vest, his father's tags from Vietnam. The old man had tried to teach him about honor, about real brotherhood. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten those lessons. They're coming apart at the seams, Cooper reported to Thomas. Psychological impact of watching real soldiers work, making them question everything they thought they knew about strength. Thomas's mind flickered back to another time. Another siege, Kandahar, where he'd first met Richards, their units surrounded, outnumbered, but holding together through something stronger than fear. Get me a direct line to the compound, he instructed. Time to remind Snake what real choices look like. The call went through on the compound's main line. Snake answered with a snarl. What? Snake, Thomas's voice was calm, reasonable. You've lost half your men. The ones still with you are scared, questioning everything. Colonel Richards's force is less than 30 minutes out. Time to think about how this ends. It ends with me burning everything you care about, old man. No, son. It ends one of 2 ways. You surrender now, walk away with some dignity intact, or you face 200 combat veterans who've spent decades perfecting the arts of war. Men who fought real battles, not just terrorized small towns. In the compound, Viper watched Snake's face contort with rage, but beneath the anger he saw something else, fear. The same fear he felt himself, facing men who'd learned their trade in the world's harshest training grounds. Your father, he said suddenly to Rattler. What unit was he with in Afghanistan? 3rd Rangers. Kandahar. Viper's face went pale. That siege. the Green Beret who moved through hell to save a platoon. You don't think? Rattler nodded grimly. Same man, the ghost of Kandahar, and we just tried to burn his flag. The reality of their situation hit Viper like a physical blow. They'd built their reputation on intimidation, on making people fear their patches and their presence. But now they faced men who'd stared into the abyss of real combat and emerged stronger. At Chen's store, an older veteran was sharing stories with spellbound townspeople. Kandahar, 83. We were surrounded, running low on everything, radio squawks. Some crazy special forces team is coming in. Heavy fire be damned. Hawk Harrison leads his men right through a storm of bullets, gets everyone out, never left a man behind. Sheriff Martinez entered Harrison Ranch, taking in the professional operation the veterans had established. Got state police reports. Richards's group passed through Phoenix 30 minutes ago. It's something else. Vehicles stretching for miles, all veterans, all moving like one unit. Thomas studied his maps, marking positions, calculating angles, just like he had in Afghanistan, just like Richards had taught him. Keep the pressure on the compound. Let them see their world shrinking. Fear's always been their weapon. Time. They felt it themselves. Outside, the midnight sky painted the desert in shades of silver and shadow. Sagebrush Springs was waking to a changed world, where once the desert raiders had ruled through intimidation, now veterans moved with quiet authority, their presence a reminder of what real strength looked like. At the compound, Snake's control continued to erode. More men slipped away with each passing hour, choosing surrender over a hopeless last stand. The remaining diehards watched the veterans' positions with growing understanding, too late, of the difference between playing at being warriors and facing real ones. Viper made his decision as he watched another group of members walk away. His father's dog tags felt heavy against his chest, a reminder of different values, different kinds of strength. He pulled Snake aside, trying one last time to reason with him. Boss, we need to face facts. These men out there, they're not going away. They're not getting tired. They're not getting scared. Everything we've tried, they've countered like they wrote the book on it. Because they did, Rattler added quietly. They wrote it in blood and fire, in places we've only heard about. We're not dealing with ordinary men here. We're up against living legends who never stopped being soldiers. Through the compound's windows, they could see the veterans maintaining their positions, their discipline unwavering, their presence an unmistakable promise of what was coming. The sound of thunder rolled across the midnight sky, not storm clouds, but the approaching roar of Richards's force, growing louder with each passing minute. The war for Sagebrush Springs was reaching its climax, and the desert raiders faced a harsh truth. They had spent years playing at being warriors, only to find themselves facing the real thing. The next hour would determine not just their fate, but the future of everything they'd built through fear and intimidation. Sagebrush Springs vibrated with the approaching roar of vehicles, the sound building like an incoming storm. Thomas Harrison stood outside his partially repaired ranch house, watching the eastern horizon where the first rays of moonlight painted the desert in shades of silver and shadow. The veterans who'd held the line through the night straightened their positions, an unconscious response to the approaching presence of their commanding officer. "My God," Sarah whispered, joining Thomas on the porch. "Listen to that. Sounds like an army coming." "That's exactly what it is," Thomas replied quietly. "Men who never forgot their oath, their brotherhood, or their debts." The sound grew louder, and now they could see them. Vehicles appearing over the rise of Route 60, their formation perfect, their drivers moving as one unit. At their head, a tall figure in a massive black truck led the column. Colonel James "Iron Jack" Richards had arrived, and he'd brought the full might of the veteran brotherhood with him. At the Desert Raiders compound, Snake Marshall stood frozen, at his window watching the seemingly endless stream of vehicles pour into town. These weren't the chaotic, intimidating displays his gang used. This was military precision, each driver knowing their exact position, their exact role. Jesus Christ, Viper breathed, counting the vehicles. Must be over 200 of them. All combat veterans, all moving like they've trained for this their whole lives. Boss, Rattler spoke from his corner, his face pale. That's it. Game over. We can't fight this. These aren't weekend warriors or wannabe tough guys. These are the real deal. Inside Chen's store, now serving as a medical support center, townspeople watched their defenders move with military precision. The fear that had once paralyzed the community was replaced by determined resolve. Multiple breach attempts at the south end. Cooper updated the tactical display. Raiders throwing everything they've got at us. Let them, Richard's confidence was absolute. Every move they make just proves what we've been saying. This isn't random crime anymore. This is organized warfare against American communities. Thomas A. watched through his window as veterans moved between defensive positions, their coordination flawless. The flag that had started everything still flew overhead, now representing something larger than one town's defiance. State police ready to move, Sheriff Martinez reported, just waiting for the raiders to commit fully. Won't be long, Thomas replied, noting the pattern of deployments. Their commander's pride won't let them back down now. In the south sector, Viper's father led the defense with combat-proven expertise. Desert raiders attempting to secure key positions found themselves facing veterans who'd learned their trade in real war. They're adapting, Cooper warned, monitoring intercepted communications, bringing in their reserve units everything they've got. Good. Richards's voice carried decades of tactical wisdom. Let them commit fully. Let them show everyone exactly who they are and what they're willing to do. Thomas's team intercepted a raider squad attempting to flank veteran positions. The reformed gang members moved with disciplined precision, their actions proving their transformation from criminals to protectors. North sector compromised, Cooper announced suddenly. Raiders' elite team breached the outer perimeter. They're heading for the command center. Execute phase 3, Thomas commanded. Show them what a real tactical response looks like. The veterans' trap began to close. In each sector, desert raiders suddenly found their carefully planned operations falling apart. Their riders, expecting to face local resistance, instead encountered combat veterans implementing sophisticated battlefield strategies. They're pulling back in the south, Cooper reported. Their commanders are starting to realize what they're really facing. Not retreat, Richards observed, watching the tactical display. Regrouping for one final push. They're going all in. Thomas's calm spread through the command center as he coordinated the multi-sector defense. Let them come. Show them the difference between hired guns and men fighting for something real. The night deepened as the desert raiders prepared their final assault. Their riders, frustrated by unexpected resistance, prepared to bring overwhelming force against veteran positions. All units, Thomas's voice carried across the radio network, remember what we're fighting for. Not just our town, but everything it represents. Show them what real warriors look like. The flag above Harrison Ranch caught moonlight as Sagebrush Springs coordinated its defense. The war that had begun with one act of disrespect had transformed into something larger, a demonstration of what real strength looked like. And as the night's battle reached its climax, veteran riders continued maintaining their positions, their presence an unshakable wall against chaos. The pre-dawn hours over Sagebrush Springs witnessed the Desert Raiders operation unraveling. Their riders, faced with sophisticated resistance they couldn't overcome, began breaking formation. Years of intimidating local communities hadn't prepared them for facing combat veterans fighting on home ground. They're losing cohesion, Cooper reported from the command center. Their tactical units are starting to fragment, communications breaking down. Thomas watched the tactical display as desert raiders retreated from veteran positions across multiple sectors. They're not just Losing the battle, they're losing their myth of invincibility. Richards coordinated with state police as law enforcement prepared to move in. Federal task force is in position, waiting for our signal to begin arrests. The raiders' elite teams, accustomed to overwhelming targets through superior firepower, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Veterans who'd learned their trade in real war demonstrated the difference between thugs and men fighting for something real. South Sector secure, Cooper reported, his team of reformed gang members, holding crucial defensive positions. Raiders trying to extract their heavy weapons. They know it's over. Viper monitored intercepted communications. His father's dog tags, a constant reminder of the path he should have taken. Their commanders are in chaos. Can't believe they're being beaten by old veterans and reformed bandits. Show them what reformed bandits can do, Thomas commanded. All units execute final containment. The veterans' response demonstrated decades of tactical expertise. Each sector's defenders moved with coordinated precision, closing escape routes and channeling desert raiders into predetermined zones. State police waited at strategic points, ready to move in once the trap was complete. Federal helicopters incoming, Sheriff Martinez announced. Task force ready to begin mass arrests. They've got enough evidence to take down the entire regional operation. Inside Chen's store, now serving as a coordination center, townspeople watch their defenders implement the final phase of Thomas's strategy. The fear that had once paralyzed the community was replaced by pride in what they'd built together. Multiple raider vehicles attempting breakthrough in the north sector. Cooper updated the tactical display. Last desperate push. Let them try. Richards's confidence was absolute. Show them what real tactical superiority looks like. Thomas led his team in, intercepting the breakout attempt. Reformed gang members moved alongside veterans with flawless coordination, their actions proving their complete transformation from criminals to protectors. East Sector reporting complete containment, Cooper's father announced over the radio. Raider forces surrounded, state police moving in. Thomas's calm spread through the command network as he coordinated the multi-sector operation. Remember, we're not just winning a battle, we're showing everyone what real community defense looks like. The first rays of dawn painted the sky as state police began moving into position. Raider forces, their professional reputation shattered, found themselves facing not just tactical defeat, but complete exposure of their operations. Federal task force beginning arrests in the South Sector, Cooper reported. Getting similar reports from all sectors. This is it. The entire regional network is coming down. Richards watched the tactical display with professional satisfaction. They thought they were facing local resistance. Instead, they ran into men who'd learned their trade in real war. Thomas's team secured key positions as law enforcement moved. In the sight of reformed gang members working alongside veterans and police demonstrated the profound transformation these towns had undergone. Raider leadership trying to negotiate, Viper reported, monitoring communications, offering money, deals, anything to maintain their power. Too late for that, Thomas replied, his voice carrying to all defenders. Show them what real power looks like, not money or fear, but communities standing together. The morning sun rose over Sagebrush Springs as federal agents began processing arrested raiders. Professional thugs who thought themselves invincible sat handcuffed, watching veterans maintain their disciplined presence. All sectors report containment complete, Cooper announced. State police have primary custody of all raider forces, federal task force moving in to assume control. Thomas stood at his ranch window, watching veteran riders maintain their positions with unwavering discipline. The flag that had started everything still flew overhead, now representing something larger than anyone had imagined. Getting reports. And from other towns, Richards reported, pride evident in his voice. Complete victory across all sectors. The raiders' entire regional operation is finished. Viper and Rattler approached Thomas, their bearing showing how far they'd come from their gang days. Sir, last raider units in custody. Our teams performed exactly as trained. Because you understood what we're really fighting for, Thomas replied. Not just against something, but for something. For community, for redemption, for real strength. State police vehicles filled the streets as federal agents documented the operation's success. The raiders' attempt to break the veterans' network had instead exposed their own vulnerability. The weakness of forces fighting only for money, facing men united by deeper bonds. Federal prosecutors already talking about using this as a template, Sheriff Martinez reported. Show other communities how to stand up to organized crime. Richards joined Thomas at the window, watching the sunrise paint Sagebrush Springs in victorious colors. Just like old times, Hawk. Different battle, same principle, Thomas replied. Unity defeats superior forces every time. The morning breeze carried sounds of celebration from multiple sectors as the community realized the depth of their victory. The raiders' power wasn't just defeated, it was replaced by something stronger, something money couldn't buy. What happens now? Rattler asked, watching federal agents processing the last arrested raiders. Thomas's smile carried decades of warriors' wisdom. Now we show other towns what's possible. Show them that real strength isn't about fear or force. It's about standing together, about transformation, about believing in something bigger than yourself. The flag above Harrison Ranch moved gently in the morning air, its stars and stripes, now symbolizing not just one town's defiance, but a movement spreading across the state. The war that had begun with one burned flag had evolved into something profound, a demonstration of what communities could achieve when they stood together against chaos. And as the sun climbed higher, veteran riders maintained their watch, their presence a reminder that real power isn't found in weapons or money, but in the unbreakable bonds of men who'd never forgotten what it meant to be warriors, what it meant to stand for something greater than themselves. The week following the desert, raiders' defeat brought profound changes to Sagebrush Springs and its allied communities. Federal agents swarmed the region, documenting evidence and processing arrested raiders. But more significantly, they studied the veterans program, recognizing something revolutionary in what Thomas Harrison and his brothers had built. Got calls from 5 more states today, Richards reported during the morning briefing at Harrison Ranch. Everyone wants to know how we did it, how we turned gang-controlled towns into protected communities. Thomas watched through his window as Viper supervised a training session for new veteran volunteers. The young man who'd once terrorized Sagebrush Springs now embodied its transformation. It's not just about protection, Thomas replied. It's about redemption, about showing people a better way. Inside Chen's store, now permanently established as a veteran support center, Sarah coordinated with federal authorities documenting the program's success. They're amazed by the numbers, she told Thomas over coffee. Crime down 85%, former gang members becoming community leaders, veterans finding new purpose. They're calling it the Sagebrush model. Cooper entered with fresh intelligence reports. Raiders' regional operation completely dismantled. FBI is using our evidence to take down their entire network. But that's not the big news. What is? Richards asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. Department of Justice wants to establish a national program. Use our veteran community partnership as a template for fighting organized crime across the country. Rattler and his father led afternoon training sessions, teaching former gang members the difference between intimidation and real strength. The sight of once bitter enemies working together drew observers from law enforcement agencies nationwide. Remember, when we thought power came from fear, Rattler asked his students. Real power comes from standing together, from protecting instead of threatening. Viper joined Thomas on the ranch's porch, watching federal agents photograph the flag that had started everything. Hard to believe it all began with them trying to burn that flag. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments, Thomas replied. One act of disrespect leading to total transformation. Sheriff Martinez arrived with news from the federal prosecutor's office. Snake's testimony is breaking open raider operations in 4 states. Seems watching our veterans take down their elite forces made quite an impression. The afternoon brought a delegation of officials from Washington, eager to study Sagebrush Springs' transformation. They found not just a protected community, but a model of redemption and renewal. Show them everything, Richards instructed the veteran leaders. Not just the tactical success, but the human changes. The real victory isn't in defeating enemies. It's in transforming them into allies. In the command center, now a permanent installation, Cooper coordinated with veteran chapters establishing similar programs in other towns. The movement that had started with one phone call was spreading like wildfire. Got interesting news from Oak Canyon, he reported. Their former gang members are requesting veteran mentorship, want to learn what real brotherhood looks like. Sarah served coffee to a mix of federal agents, veterans, and reformed gang members, marveling at the changes in her town. Remember when we used to tremble at the sound of engines? Now it means protection's arrived. Thomas studied maps showing the spread of veteran-protected communities, his tactical mind seeing patterns of positive change. It's not just about defending territory anymore. It's about building something lasting. Richards gathered the core. Team for afternoon briefing. Pride evident in his bearing. State police want to establish permanent liaison with our veteran chapters. They're calling it the Community Shield Initiative. Viper led his team in demonstrating tactical procedures for visiting law enforcement officials. The precision of reformed gang members working alongside veterans left a powerful impression. This is what real change looks like, he explained to the observers. Not just stopping criminal activity, but replacing it with something better. Rattler's father, coordinating with veteran chapters across 3 states, reported growing interest from military organizations nationwide. They see what we've built here, real community defense, real transformation. They want to be part of it. As evening approached, Sagebrush Springs prepared for a celebration marking 1 week since the flag-burning incident that had changed everything. The town had transformed from a community living in fear to a beacon of hope for others. Got something to show you, Richards told Thomas, leading him to the command center's main display. Map of veteran requests to establish similar programs. Over 200 towns across 15 states. Thomas watched the evening sun paint Sagebrush Springs in peaceful colors. The flag above his ranch moved gently in the breeze, its meaning deeper now than ever before. You know what the real victory is? He asked Richards, watching veterans and townspeople preparing for the celebration. Not defeating the raiders, not even establishing the program. It's showing people what's possible when they stand together. Inside Chen's store, photos covered one wall. The history of Sagebrush. Springs' transformation, the burned flag, the veteran response, the defeat of the desert raiders. But more importantly, images of community healing, of redemption, of people finding better ways to live. Federal Task Force wants you to head up the national training program, Richards told Thomas. Teach other communities what we learned here. Thomas's smile carried decades of warriors' wisdom. What we learned is simple, Jack. Real strength isn't about weapons or fear. It's about standing together, about believing in something bigger than yourself. The evening deepened as Sagebrush Springs prepared to celebrate not just victory, but transformation. The war that had begun with one burned flag had evolved into something profound, a movement spreading across the nation, showing communities everywhere that real power comes not from fear, but from unity, purpose, and the courage to stand together against chaos. 1 month after the Desert Raiders' fall, Sagebrush Springs had transformed into something its residents barely recognized. The morning sun rose over a town where fear no longer ruled the streets, where the rumble of engines brought comfort rather than dread. Thomas Harrison still raised the flag each morning outside his rebuilt ranch house, but now he was rarely alone. Veterans from the local Brotherhood chapter often joined him, their presence a quiet reminder of the power of unity. Federal prosecutor. Called yesterday, Sheriff Martinez announced, joining them after the flag raising. Snakes looking at 25 years minimum. They're using him to dismantle raider operations across 3 states. Thomas nodded, watching townspeople going about their morning routines without the tension that had once marked their movements. And our local boys? The ones who cooperated, who showed real remorse? Mostly probation, community service. Working with the veterans seems to be straightening them out. Inside Chen's store, now unofficially known as the Veterans Mess, breakfast crowds mixed freely, veterans and townspeople sharing coffee and conversation. The place had become more than just a store. It was a symbol of the town's rebirth. Never thought I'd see the day, Sarah told Michael as they watched Viper helping an elderly veteran with his wheelchair. Remember how that boy used to strut around here, terrorizing everyone? People can change, Michael replied, when they're shown a better way. The store's door chimed as Cooper entered, now the permanent commander of Sagebrush Springs' veteran Brotherhood chapter. His presence carried authority without intimidation, strength without threat. Got word from Cedar Valley, he announced to Thomas. They're having gang problems, asking if we can help set up something like what we've got here. Thomas sipped his coffee thoughtfully. What does Richard say? Colonel's already organizing. Says Sagebrush Springs can be a model for other towns. Show them what real community protection looks like. Outside, Rattler was leading a group of former raiders through their morning routine, cleaning streets, helping elderly residents, learning what real service meant. Each wore a plain leather jacket with a small American flag patch. Their first step toward earning real respect. It's not just about keeping order, Rattler explained to his group. It's about building something worth protecting. The morning's peace was briefly interrupted by the roar of unfamiliar motorcycles, a small gang from 2 counties over, testing Sagebrush Springs' reputation. They made it 3 blocks before finding themselves surrounded by veterans and reformed gang members moving with coordinated precision. Heard this was raider territory, the lead rider sneered. Not anymore. Viper stepped forward, his stance carrying new confidence. This is a protected community. Suggest you move on. The wannabe tough guys took in the scene. Veterans positioned with tactical precision, former gang members standing alongside them, townspeople watching without fear. They left quickly, their bravado deflated by the sight of real strength. Well handled, Thomas told Viper afterward. Didn't need threats or violence, just showed them what they were facing. Learned from the best, Viper replied. Still learning. At the newly established Veterans Brotherhood chapter house, once the Raiders' compound, Richard's latest communication was being discussed. The colonel had been expanding the program, using Sagebrush Springs transformation as a blueprint for troubled communities. 8 towns now, Cooper reported, all asking for help setting up similar programs. Colonel says we're changing the whole concept of community protection. Thomas watched through the window as more veterans arrived for the day shift. Each brought skills and experience, not just in security, but in community building. They weren't just guards. They were mentors, teachers, examples of what real strength looked like. Sarah approached Thomas as he surveyed the changed town. You know what the real difference is, Hawk? It's not just about being protected, it's about being part of something bigger, something better. Thomas nodded, remembering another time when men had stood together against chaos. That's what real strength is, not standing alone, but standing together, not just fighting against something, but fighting for something. The evening light painted Sagebrush Springs in shades of gold, highlighting a community transformed not just by force, but by example. The war was long over, but its greatest victory wasn't in defeating an enemy, it was in showing them a better way. As darkness fell, the veterans' brotherhood continued their watch, their presence a reminder that some things were worth protecting, some battles worth fighting, some changes worth making. Sagebrush Springs had become more than just another small Arizona town. It had become a beacon, showing others that real strength wasn't found in fear or intimidation, but in unity, purpose, and the courage to stand together against the darkness. The flag still flew over Harrison Ranch, but its meaning had grown. It no longer just represented one veteran's defiance or one town's stand. It stood for the power of transformation, for the possibility of redemption, for the truth that real strength isn't found in breaking things, but in rebuilding them, in showing others a better way, in standing together against the darkness, not with fear or force, but with the unshakable power of brotherhood and belief in something bigger than ourselves. As Thomas performed his final flag check of the night, a tradition unchanged since his military days, he thought about how one act of disrespect had sparked something its perpetrators could never have imagined. Not just the defeat of a gang, but the birth of a movement that was spreading hope across the nation, one community at a time. The desert wind carried the sound of veteran patrols, their engines, a lullaby of protection rather than a threat. Sagebrush Springs slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that real warriors stood guard. Men who understood that true strength comes not from causing fear, but from standing together against it, from offering redemption even to those who seem lost, from believing in something greater than themselves. The story of Sagebrush Springs had become more than just a tale of victory. It had become a testament to the power of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light can take root and grow when men of courage stand together, when old soldiers remember their oath, and when a community finds the strength to believe in something bigger than fear. The flag that had started it all still flew proud and free, its stars and stripes no longer just a symbol of defiance, but a beacon of hope for communities across the nation, a promise that where men stand together with purpose and honor, darkness cannot prevail, and real strength will always triumph over fear.